He slammed the termination letter down so hard the glass desk cracked. Not chipped, cracked. A spiderweb fracture spreading from the corner to the center, while 32 employees watched in absolute silence and a woman named Janet Yu stood motionless in front of him, her resignation letter still warm from the printer, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't hold her own bag. Kang Min-jae didn't raise his voice. That was the worst part. He never raised his voice. "You made one error," he said. "One. In a shipment manifest worth $40 million. You had one job, and you couldn't do it. Clean out your desk before I finish this sentence." Janet was gone before he finished the sentence. That was a Tuesday. By Friday, 3 more secretaries had followed her out the same door. One had cried in the elevator. One had simply stopped showing up. The third had submitted her resignation through a text message at 2 in the morning and blocked the company's number immediately after. Nobody lasted a full week working for Kang Min-jae. Nobody. Until a clumsy, plus-size black woman from Chicago walked through his door carrying a spilled coffee, a dropped folder, and absolutely zero awareness of what she had just walked into. If you've ever walked into a room and immediately known you did not belong there, this story is for you. If you've ever been underestimated so completely that people didn't even bother hiding it, stay with me. Like this video if you believe that the people the world overlooks are usually the ones it needs the most. Drop your city and country in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss what happens next. Because what is coming in the next 4 parts of this story will leave you absolutely speechless. Now, let's begin. Mabt. The job listing had said Executive Secretary, Corporate Division, Baeko International, Seoul, South Korea. The salary figure had made Nia Brooks' eyes water. She had read the number 4 times, refreshed the page twice, and then called her best friend Daeya in Chicago at 11:30 at night, just to read it out loud and confirm she was not hallucinating from exhaustion and ramen noodles. "That's real money," Daeya had said, voice thick with sleep. "That's buy your mama a house money." "That's buy my mama a house and a car money," Nia had corrected, already typing her application. She had not told Daeya about the 2 other positions she had lost that year. She hadn't mentioned the Chicago firm that had let her go after 6 months with the explanation that she didn't quite fit the culture, which everyone in the room had understood to mean something else entirely. She hadn't brought up the second interview that had gone beautifully, where she had answered every question sharp and fast, only to receive a rejection email that said they had found a candidate who was a more natural fit for the role. Nia was 27 years old. She had a master's degree in international business from DePaul University, fluency in Mandarin, a working knowledge of Korean she had spent 3 years building from scratch, and a brain that retained information the way most people couldn't even explain, much less replicate. She could read a shipping manifest and tell you where the numbers didn't add up. She could scan a 40-page contract and locate the buried clause that everyone else had missed. She had done it twice during her graduate internship, and her supervisor at the time had looked at her like she'd pulled a coin from behind his ear. None of that had mattered much in Chicago, but Baeko International had responded within 48 hours of her application. The interview had been conducted entirely over video call by a composed, elegant Korean woman named Han Soo-yeon, who had asked Nia 3 questions about logistics pattern recognition, listened to her answers with quiet intensity, and then said simply, "When can you start?" Nia had started 8 days later. She had landed at Incheon International Airport on a gray October morning with 2 suitcases, a carry-on bag that was already straining at its zipper, and a thermos of coffee she had filled in the terminal because she needed it more than she needed oxygen. She was nervous. She was excited. She was telling herself quietly and firmly that this time was going to be different. She had been in the elevator of Baeko's corporate headquarters for approximately 45 seconds when the doors opened on the 38th floor and she walked directly into the most important person in the building. She didn't know that yet. What she knew was that she was moving too fast. The thermos was in her right hand, the carry-on bag was slung over her left shoulder, and when the elevator opened and a tall man in a charcoal suit stepped forward expecting the car to be empty, Nia stepped out at exactly the wrong angle. The thermos tilted, and approximately 14 ounces of black coffee arced through the air in a long, beautiful, catastrophic curve and landed directly across the man's chest, his tie, and a portion of his left sleeve. The silence that followed was the kind that had physical weight. Nia froze. The man looked down at his ruined shirt. Then he looked up at her. He had a face that could have been carved from something harder than stone. Dark eyes that did not express surprise because they appeared to have stopped being surprised by anything a long time ago. He was maybe 35, maybe older, with the posture of someone who had been told from childhood to take up space and had simply never stopped. There was a stillness about him that was not calm. It was the stillness of something that had not yet decided to move. "I am so sorry," Nia said immediately, already reaching into her bag for anything that could help. A napkin, a tissue, a receipt from duty-free. Something. "I didn't see you, I swear. The doors just opened and I was trying to get my bag and the coffee. I have napkins. I have lots of napkins. Please let me—" "Stop talking," the man said. His voice was low and flat. Not angry, not exactly, just absolute, in a way that landed like a door closing. Nia stopped talking. She had about 4,000 more words ready to go, but she pressed them all down and pressed her mouth shut and stood there holding a dripping thermos while the most important man in the building looked at her like she was a problem he had not yet classified. A man in a dark suit materialized from somewhere behind him. Nia hadn't even noticed him standing there, and held out a folded handkerchief without being asked. The important man took it, pressed it once against his tie, handed it back, looked at Nia again. "Who are you?" he said. Not a question, a requirement. "Nia Brooks," she said. I'm the new executive secretary. I start today. I'm supposed to report to the 38th floor, this is the 38th floor, so." She exhaled. "Hi." Nothing moved in his face. "You're early," he said. "I'm always early," she said, and then immediately wished she hadn't said anything at all because his eyes shifted in a way that made the air feel 2 degrees colder. He walked past her without another word. The man in the dark suit glanced at Nia with an expression she couldn't read and followed him. The elevator doors closed. Nia stood in the empty corridor with a half-empty thermos and the distinct impression that she had already failed at something important before she had signed a single form. She did not know yet that the man whose suit she had just ruined was Kang Min Jai. She did not know that he was the CEO of Baeko International, the official face of one of the most powerful logistics corporations in Asia. She definitely did not know that he was also, quietly and without any official record that any law enforcement agency had ever been able to touch, the head of the Baeko Syndicate, an organization that had controlled international shipping routes, port authority access, and supply chain infrastructure across 7 Asian markets for 3 generations. She found most of that out in the next 90 minutes. Not all of it, not the worst parts, but enough to understand that spilling coffee on this particular man was not the kind of accident that produced a formal complaint and a dry cleaning bill. It was the kind that produced consequences. The executive floor of Baeko International was the kind of space that made you lower your voice without being asked. Everything in it was precise. The art on the walls was minimal and expensive, chosen not to provoke feeling but to signal control. The carpet absorbed sound. The staff moved with economy. No wasted motion, no unnecessary conversation, no extended eye contact. Nia counted 6 people in the open office area when she was escorted in by a young assistant named Park Ji-ho, and not one of them looked up from their screens as she passed. Ji-ho was maybe 23, small, efficient, and visibly managing something internal when he looked at Nia. Not unkindness, more like the expression of a person watching someone sit down on a chair they know has a broken leg. "The Director of Human Resources will brief you," Ji-ho said quietly, placing a folder on the desk outside the main office. "Please review the confidentiality agreements before she arrives. There are 7 of them." 7, Nia repeated. "All require signature before noon." "Is that—" She looked at the folder. It was thick. "Is that normal?" Ji-ho considered the question seriously. "For this position," he said. "Yes." He left. Nia sat down, opened the folder, and started reading. By the third confidentiality agreement, she understood that this job was not what the listing had described. The listing had said executive secretary. The agreements described a role that involved access to internal communications, shipping manifest authorization, liaison duties with affiliated business divisions she had never heard of, and a security clearance classification that no ordinary corporate secretary position should have required. She was still reading when Han Soo-yeon walked in. Nia had spoken to this woman twice on video, once for the interview, once briefly afterward to arrange logistics. In person, she was something else entirely. Elegantly dressed, maybe 60, with a composure that was clearly not performed, but simply how she existed. She moved like someone who had long since stopped caring about the impression she made because she had already won every room she'd ever entered. "Miss Brooks," she said, sitting across from Nia, "I trust the flight was manageable." "It was great," Nia said, and then, because she could not help herself, "I spilled coffee on a man in the elevator on the way up, in case that gets reported." Han Soo-yeon's expression did not change. "That was my son." Nia's stomach dropped through the floor. "You're the CEO?" "Yes?" "I spilled coffee on the CEO." 14 ounces, Soo-yeon said, as though she had already been informed. "He is particular about his suits. However, he is also aware that accidents occur." She paused. "He simply chooses not to accept that framing." Nia opened her mouth. "He will likely expect you to resign by end of day," Soo-yeon continued. "Most secretaries do. The position has significant turnover." "How significant?" "You are the 11th candidate in 14 months. Nia closed her mouth, counted to 3, reopened it. "Why are you telling me this?" The older woman looked at her steadily. "Because I hired you, Miss Brooks, and I prefer honesty. The previous candidates were qualified. Several were exceptional. My son's expectations are not unreasonable in principle. In practice, however, they require a particular kind of person to endure them." "What kind?" Soo-yeon studied her for a moment. "Someone who doesn't frighten easily," she said, "and who reads faster than most people think." She nodded toward the folder. "Finish the agreements. You begin at 9. She left. Nia sat alone with the folder, the chair, and the quiet understanding that she had walked into something considerably more complicated than an executive secretary position. She should have been alarmed. She should have, at minimum, felt the first tremor of the very reasonable instinct to collect her bag and go back to the airport. Instead, she finished all 7 agreements by 8:45, signed them in order, and went to find the coffee machine. Her first full day produced 4 disasters. Not metaphorical ones, actual documentable disasters that she tallied in her head by the time 5 o'clock arrived. Disaster 1, the coffee. Already recorded. Disaster 2, the conference room prep. She had been tasked with organizing the materials for a mid-morning leadership meeting. 17 folders, each corresponding to one department head, each containing a specific set of documents in a specific order. She had organized them. She had checked the order twice. What she had not accounted for was that her carry-on bag had been sitting open on the edge of the conference table while she worked, and when she reached across it for the stapler, the entire bag went over the edge, pulling 2 of the folders with it, scattering documents across 12 feet of floor. She had reassembled them in 11 minutes flat, every document in its correct position, because she had read all of them during the initial organization and retained the sequence without trying to. She had been back at the table, everything straightened, with 4 minutes to spare before anyone arrived. Min-jae had walked in early. He had stood in the doorway and looked at her and looked at the folders and said nothing. She could not tell whether he had seen. His face didn't give her anything to read from. Disaster 3, the antique vase. There was a tall ceramic vase in the corridor outside his office, placed on a low wooden stand near the window. It was, she would later learn, a piece of Korean blue and white porcelain from the late Joseon dynasty, roughly 300 years old and valued at somewhere she didn't want to calculate. She did not learn any of this until after she walked past it, misjudged the width of the corridor while carrying a stack of files, and nudged the stand with her hip. She caught the vase. She actually caught it. Both hands, files dropping, arms shooting out in opposite directions, and stood frozen for a solid 4 seconds with her heart somewhere in her throat, holding something she now understood was irreplaceable. Jiho had appeared from nowhere, face white. "Don't move," he whispered. "I'm not moving," she whispered back. "That vase is—" I know. I figured that out. Can you please just—" He took it from her hands with extraordinary care and replaced it on the stand. They both exhaled. Neither of them mentioned it to anyone. Nia did not fully exhale again until 3 hours later. Disaster 4 was the phone. Minjae's direct line had 2 protocols, calls from a list of approved numbers routed automatically. Everything else required her to screen them, identify the caller, and either transfer or decline according to a priority system Jiho had spent 20 minutes explaining. It was straightforward. She understood it completely. What she had not been told was that Minjae was on a call with a business partner in Singapore when she accidentally transferred an unscreened call into the middle of it, a wrong number from a dry cleaning service trying to confirm a pickup. She had realized the error in real time, watching the light on the phone panel shift, and for a brief moment had considered simply walking directly out of the building and into the Han River. Instead, she had disconnected the wrong call, continued monitoring the panel, and when Minjae emerged from his office 17 minutes later, she had handed him a written summary of the Singapore call's timeline with the erroneous interruption noted, along with the name of the dry cleaning service and their callback number. He had read it without expression. "This is your written account of your own mistake," he said. "I think it's better for you to have it documented," she said, "than to find out later and not have the details." He had looked at her for a very long time. "Most people," he said, "would simply pretend it didn't happen." "Most people aren't me," she said, and then regretted the phrasing immediately because it sounded like bragging, and she absolutely had not meant it that way. "I just mean, I'd rather tell you than have you find out." He had looked at her for another moment. Then he had gone back into his office and closed the door. Jiho had appeared at her elbow 30 seconds later. "He didn't fire you," Jiho said, in the tone of someone reporting a minor miracle. "He didn't fire me," Nia confirmed. "He fired the last secretary for mispronouncing a client's name." Nia stared at him. "On a voicemail," Jiho added. She looked at the closed door of Minjae's office. Then she looked back at Jiho. "I need," she said carefully, "a list of every client's name, pronunciation guide included." Jiho almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. "I'll have it to you in 10 minutes. By the end of the first week, something had shifted. She couldn't name it yet. It wasn't warmth. Minjae did not produce warmth, at least not in any direction she could detect. It wasn't approval exactly. It was more like the almost imperceptible recalibration of someone who had made an assumption and found unexpected data. He had watched her work. He hadn't said so, but she felt it. The way a question landed on her desk and then nothing happened for 10 minutes, and then he would emerge from his office as though casually, and she would look up and he would find some reason to be looking at something else. The way he had picked up the written error summary she'd left him on day 1, and she had noticed later that it was not in the recycling bin with the rest of the day's papers. The way he had been on his phone in the corridor near her desk on Wednesday evening, and had briefly stopped walking when she'd answered a complex logistics inquiry from a Busan-based partner entirely in Korean. He had not said anything. He had continued his call, but he had stopped walking. On Friday afternoon, Soo-yeon appeared at Nia's desk without announcement, as she apparently did when she felt like it, and set down a container of doenjang jjigae from the place 2 blocks away that Nia had been meaning to try since Tuesday. "Eat," Soo-yeon said. "You haven't had lunch." "I know what you've been doing," the older woman said. She sat across from Nia without being invited, in the same unhurried way she did everything. "He watched you with the Busan call." Nia opened the container. "I noticed." "He doesn't notice most people. He categorizes them. He's watching." Soo-yeon folded her hands on the desk. "That means you've survived the first sorting." "There's a sorting?" "There's always a sorting. He decides within the first 72 hours whether someone is a liability or a resource. The previous 10 secretaries were all liabilities." Nia looked at her soup. And me? He hasn't decided yet, Soo-yeon said. Which is itself unusual. He's normally faster. She paused. Don't mistake uncertainty for progress. He's still looking for the reason to let you go. I know, Nia said quietly. Do you? I know exactly what I look like to him, Nia said. She kept her voice level because she had long practice at it. I know what I look like to most people. Clumsy, loud, takes up too much space. Not exactly what anyone pictures when they think executive secretary to a Korean corporate CEO. Soo-yeon said nothing. I know all of that, Nia continued. I also know that I read the Busan Partners Q3 shipping summary in 8 minutes this morning, and I found a calculation error in column 14 that would have cost a significant amount of money to reconcile at end of quarter. I fixed it before I forwarded the document. She looked up. Did he see that? Soo-yeon's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. He saw it, she said. Nia nodded and ate her soup. Outside the window, Seoul spread itself across the horizon in layers. Glass towers and market streets, and the flat silver line of the Han River running through the middle of everything, indifferent and permanent. She had been in this city for 5 days. She had dropped files, almost broken a priceless vase, crashed a business call, and spilled coffee on the most feared man in the building. She was still here. She picked up her chopsticks and looked at the city and thought about her father, who had also come to this city once, a long time ago, chasing something he believed was worth the risk. She thought about him more than she usually let herself. Then she put it away, where she always put it, in the quiet place behind everything else, and went back to work. There were 17 more documents waiting on her desk. 2 of them, she already suspected, were going to be interesting. She was right. The 17 documents had been waiting on her desk since 4 in the afternoon. By 7:30 in the evening, everyone else on the 38th floor had gone home. The overhead lights had shifted to their after-hours setting. Lower, more yellow, the kind of light that made an empty office feel like the inside of something abandoned. Nia had not noticed the shift. She was on the 14th document, and she had stopped breathing normally about 6 minutes ago. Not because the documents were difficult, because 3 of them didn't match. Not in an obvious way. Not in the way that jumped out at you if you were scanning for errors or running a reconciliation check. The mismatch was buried inside the formatting itself, inside the aesthetic layer of the documents, the part most people's eyes slid over because it looked decorative. Beko International's internal shipping manifest used a standardized header block that included, among other things, a small repeating motif in the upper right corner. A seal. Ornamental. The kind of thing a design department put in 20 years ago and nobody had ever thought about since. Except on 3 of the manifests in front of her, the seal was slightly different. Not wrong. Not corrupted. Different in a way that looked intentional, like someone had taken the original template and made a choice. Nia set the 3 documents side by side on her desk. She looked at them for a long time. Then she took out her phone and pulled up the images she had photographed earlier in the day from the shipping archive room on the 22nd floor. A room she had been sent to retrieve a single box of records from and had instead spent 40 minutes in because the organizational system had made no sense to her, and she had started trying to understand it before she remembered she was supposed to just find the box and leave. She compared the seal in her phone photos to the seal on the 3 manifests. Her jaw tightened. The symbol embedded in those 3 seals was not a design variation. It was Korean calligraphy. Old calligraphy. Joseon-era brushwork compressed and stylized until it looked like ornamentation. She had studied enough historical Korean script during her language training to recognize the structure of it, even if she couldn't read the compressed form cleanly yet. It was there, deliberately placed, invisible to anyone who looked at it and saw what it was designed to look like, which was nothing. She sat back in her chair. Her pulse was doing something uncomfortable. She picked up the 3 manifests and walked to Min Jae's office and knocked on the door. He was still there. She had known he would be. His light had been on since she arrived that morning, and she had not seen it go off once. She didn't know if he slept at the office or simply didn't sleep, and she had not yet found a tactful way to ask. "Come in," he said. She opened the door. He was at his desk with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled to the elbow, working through something on his laptop, with the focused economy of someone who had been doing this for decades. He looked up when she entered. His expression said he had expected Ji-ho, or possibly no one. "Miss Brooks?" He looked at the documents in her hand. "It's past 7. "I know." She crossed the room and set the 3 manifests on his desk in a row. "Look at the seals." He looked at her first. Then he looked at the manifests. "The header ornament," she said, pointing. "Upper right corner. These 3 are different from the rest. The motif is modified. If you look at the underlying structure of the brushwork, it's calligraphy. Old calligraphy. I don't have a clean read on it yet, but the pattern is not decorative. It's linguistic." He had gone very still. Not the way people went still when they were confused. The way they went still when something they hadn't expected had just confirmed something they already feared. "Where did these come from?" he said. "Your incoming manifest archive. These were in the batch from the 22nd floor." "When were you in the archive room?" "This afternoon. I was sent to retrieve the Q4 transit records. I noticed the organizational structure was inconsistent, so I started mapping it, and She stopped. "I know I was supposed to just get the box." He was not looking at the manifests anymore. He was looking at her. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He picked up the nearest manifest and held it at a specific angle under his desk lamp, the way you did when you were looking at something you needed the light to reveal. His jaw was set. His breathing was controlled in the deliberate way of someone keeping it controlled. "How many of these did you find?" he said. "In the batch I looked through, 3, but I only looked through approximately a third of the box before I remembered I was supposed to leave. If the pattern continues at the same frequency, there could be 8 to 12 more in that box alone. I don't know how far back the archive goes." He set the manifest down. "Did you tell anyone else what you found?" "No." "Did you photograph these?" She paused. "I photographed the archive room's organizational structure, not the manifests themselves. The detail wasn't visible at phone camera resolution until I got up here with the originals and compared them side by side." He held her gaze for a moment longer than felt comfortable. Then he picked up his phone, made a call, said 4 words in Korean too low and fast for her to catch clearly, and ended it. "You will not return to the archive room," he said. "You will not mention what you found to anyone on this floor, including Ji-ho. You will leave the 3 manifests here and go home. I'd like to finish reading them first." Miss Brooks. If there's a linguistic structure in the seal, I can probably decode it given the historical context. I have access to Joseon-era calligraphy references through my graduate research files. It would take me a few hours. That is not your assignment. I know that. She kept her voice steady. I'm offering. He was quiet for a moment. In the silence, she could hear the building's ventilation system and, very faintly, traffic from 38 floors below. Go home, he said. Come back at 7 tomorrow. She stood, picked up her bag, walked to the door. Miss Brooks? She stopped. You notice something that has been in those archives for years, he said. Something that 9 people before you did not notice. His voice was flat, uninflected, giving her nothing. That is either very fortunate or very deliberate. I haven't decided which yet. She turned to face him. I could tell you which it is. I know you could. He looked back at his laptop. Good night. She was back at 6:53 the next morning. Ji-ho was already at his desk and looked up with the expression of someone recalibrating. You're early, he said. I'm always early, she said, and hung up her coat. At 7:02, Min-jae walked past her desk without stopping, set a thin folder beside her keyboard without comment, and went into his office. She opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 12 names on it. Shipping companies, formatted as a simple list with no annotations. She understood immediately. Cross-reference the manifests against these companies. Find the pattern. She started at 7:04. By 9:15, she had found it. By 9:30, she wished she hadn't. The 12 companies were all legitimate, incorporated, licensed, operating in multiple markets. completely real on paper. What they shared, buried 6 layers deep in their transit documentation and cargo routing histories, was a single point of convergence, a logistics corridor that ran from South Korea through 3 intermediate ports and terminated at a series of receiving addresses in Southeast Asia that should not have existed in a commercial shipping context. She knew what those addresses meant. Not specifically. But she had studied international trade law, and she knew what categories of destination produced that kind of routing opacity, and none of those categories were legal. She sat with that knowledge for about 90 seconds. Then she stood up, knocked on Min Jae's door, and walked in without waiting. He looked up sharply. He was on a call. She held up one finger, 1 minute, and placed the routing map she had drawn by hand on his desk. She had marked the convergence point in red. He looked at it. His expression didn't change. But the call ended in 30 seconds. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. "Sit." She sat. He turned the routing map to face himself and studied it. She watched him read it the way she sometimes watched people read things she'd handed them, watching the eyes, watching the speed, watching for the place where they found the thing she'd already found and seeing how long it took. It took him 11 seconds. "How confident are you?" he said. "In the routing convergence? Completely. In what the convergence implies." She paused. "I'm confident enough that I knocked on your door without being asked." He set the map down, put both hands flat on the desk, looked at her. "This stays in this room," he said. "Obviously." "Not obviously. I need you to understand what I'm telling you." His voice was quiet and very precise. "Nothing you have found, nothing you find going forward, leaves this office. Not Jiho, not HR, not anyone in this building. Do you understand me?" Something in his tone had changed, still flat, still controlled. But underneath the control there was something she could feel the edges of. Something that had been running a long time and was very tired of running. "I understand," she said. "You have a photographic memory." It wasn't a question. She answered it anyway. "Near photographic, I retain structure and pattern better than exact image." "The routing map you drew from memory." "From the documents I cross-referenced, yes." He was quiet. "Someone inside this building," he said, "has been running an operation through our shipping infrastructure without my authorization. For years." He didn't look away from her. "You are the first person who has found evidence of it." She held very still. "I need to know," he continued, "whether you are capable of keeping that information contained and whether you are capable of continuing to look." "Are you asking me to investigate?" "I'm asking if you're capable of doing so without getting yourself killed," he said. The word landed exactly the way he delivered it, without dramatics, without softening, just a fact placed in front of her. She had expected something like this since last night. She had been walking toward it since she sat down with the first manifest. That didn't make hearing it out loud any easier. "I'm better at finding things than I am at defending myself," she said. "I'm going to be honest about that." "I have people for the second part," he said. "I need someone for the first." Cho Hyun-seok arrived at 11. Nia had not yet learned to read the room's response to him. How the staff straightened slightly without meaning to. How Jiho's movements became more economical. How the quality of silence shifted. She was still learning the floor's social topography. But she noticed something was different when the elevator opened and a man in his mid-50s walked out moving the way people walked when they were used to everyone getting out of their way. He was well-dressed, broad-shouldered in the way of a man who had been physically imposing 20 years ago and whose body still remembered it. His hair was silver at the temples. His face had the composed, faintly pleasant surface of someone who had spent decades being trusted. He smiled at Nia when he passed her desk. "You must be the new secretary," he said, in English that was precise and accent-free. "Miss Brooks?" "That's right," she said. "Cho Hyun-seok. I've worked with the Kang family for nearly 20 years." He said it the way people mention long tenure, as a credential, as a wall. "How are you finding Seoul?" "I'm still finding it," she said. "It's a big city." He smiled again. It reached his eyes the way practiced smiles reached eyes, all the way to the surface, no deeper. It becomes smaller the longer you're here, he said. You start to see how everything connects. He moved past her toward Min Jae's office. She watched him. She did not know yet who he was in the architecture of what she had found. She knew only what his name did to the atmosphere when he moved through it. She waited until his knock on Min Jae's door was answered and the door had closed. Then she picked up her pen and wrote his name at the top of a fresh page. She drew a line down the center of the page. On the left side, she wrote, "What I know." On the right side, "What I need to find out." The left side had almost nothing on it yet. The right side was already full. So the meeting lasted 40 minutes. When Hyun Seok came out, he walked past Nia's desk without looking at her. That was the part she registered. Not the absence of a goodbye, but the shift from before to after. On the way in, he had been social, deliberate, performing the small courtesy of acknowledging the new staff member. On the way out, he walked like she was furniture. Something had been said in that room. She didn't know what. Min Jae's door stayed closed for the rest of the afternoon. At 4 o'clock, Jiho appeared at her desk with a box. Not a small box. A banker's box, sealed, with a handwritten label in Korean that she could read. Baeko Archive, Historical Transit Records, 1998 to 2006. Director Kang asked that you begin a preliminary review, Jiho said. He set the box down and looked at it and then looked at her. He said you'd know what you're looking for. Did he say anything else? Jiho hesitated for a fraction of a second. He said to keep your desk lamp on while you work. She looked at the box. That's a strange thing to say. Yes, Jiho agreed. He did not offer more. She opened the box. Inside were transit manifests going back to 1998. Hundreds of them, organized by year in manila folders, each folder packed tight. She pulled the first folder and opened it on her desk. There were 11 manifests in the first folder. 7 of them had the modified seal. Her stomach turned over. She kept her face neutral and kept working. She had the lamp on. The floor was emptying around her as the afternoon turned toward evening. She pulled out her notebook and started logging the modified seal appearances by date, by route, by cargo classification. By 6 o'clock, she had a pattern that went back 8 years, at minimum. By 6:30, she had found the first name she recognized from Min Jae's list embedded inside a cargo authorization signature. By 7, she had found something else entirely. Something she had not expected. Something that had nothing to do with Min Jae's syndicate, or Hyun Seok's name, or the illegal routing corridors she had been tracing. At the bottom of a manifest dated 11 years ago, in the authorization field for a secondary cargo declaration, was a signature she recognized. Not from this company, not from anything she had researched in preparation for this job, from a photograph. A photograph she had kept in the back of her journal since she was 16 years old, in the inside cover, held there by a strip of tape she had replaced 3 times as it dried out. A photograph of a man she had not seen in 15 years, who had come to Seoul following a story he believed would change everything, and who had never come home. Her father's signature was on a document inside the Baeko International Archive. She sat with that for a long moment. She did not move. She was not sure she was breathing. Then she turned the manifest over and read the back. There was a stamp on the reverse, a date, 11 days before Marcus Brooks had disappeared, a cargo route notation, and in the corner, in a different hand from the rest, a single Korean character she knew immediately. It meant contained. The lamp was still on. The floor was empty around her. She looked at the manifest in her hands and understood, in the specific cold way of understanding that closes the door behind it as it enters, that she had not come to Seoul for a job. She had been circling this building, this archive, this file for 15 years without knowing it, and someone inside Baeko International had known her father's name long before she had ever walked through their door. She sat with the manifest for 4 minutes and 20 seconds. She knew the duration because she was staring at the clock on the far wall and watching the second hand move and using it to keep herself anchored to something mechanical and indifferent, while everything else inside her chest rearranged itself into something she didn't have a word for yet. Her father's signature. Marcus Brooks. Investigative journalist. Chicago Tribune foreign correspondent. Last seen in Seoul, South Korea, 15 years ago. when Nia was 12 years old and her mother had told her he was on assignment and would be back in 3 weeks. And 3 weeks had become a month, and a month had become silence, and silence had become a missing persons report that went nowhere, and a consulate response that said they were looking, and a funeral without a body 4 years later because the court required a declaration of death, and her mother had needed the life insurance to keep the apartment. She had his photograph in her journal. A man with her same wide mouth and her same way of tilting his head when he was thinking hard about something. She had memorized that photograph so completely that she could reconstruct it from any angle in complete detail, every shadow, every crease in his collar. His signature on this document was identical to the signature on the birthday card he had sent her from Seoul 2 weeks before he vanished. She had that card too. She had read it so many times the fold had gone soft. She placed the manifest flat on her desk. She pressed both palms on either side of it and breathed. Then she stood up, walked to Min Jae's door, and knocked. No answer. She tried the handle. Locked. She looked at Ji-ho's empty desk. The floor was silent. She checked her phone. 7:14. She had a number for Min Jae that she had never used for anything except transferring calls. She stared at it for a moment and then pressed call. It rang twice. Miss Brooks? His voice was alert in the specific way of someone who had not been asleep. I need to show you something, she said. Tonight. A pause. Where are you? Still at my desk. Stay there. He arrived in 11 minutes, still in the same shirt from that morning, jacket gone, the top button of his collar open. He looked at her face when he came through the door and something shifted in his expression. Not softness, nothing that simple, but a recalibration, a sharpening of attention that meant he had already registered that this was not a routine discovery. She handed him the manifest without speaking. He read it. He read it again. He looked at the stamp on the back. He looked at the Korean character in the corner, and his jaw tightened in a way she had not seen before. A small, involuntary movement that he immediately controlled, but she had been watching him closely enough by now to catch it. Marcus Brooks, he said. My father, she said. The silence that followed had texture. He set the manifest on the desk and looked at her. She looked back. She was holding herself very still because she had found through long practice that stillness was the only way to keep the thing behind her sternum from becoming something she couldn't manage in front of other people. You knew this name before tonight, she said. It was not a question. He didn't answer immediately. That was its own answer. Tell me, she said. Nia. He used her name for the first time. She registered it the way you registered a door opening that had previously always been closed. What I know is incomplete. Tell me the incomplete version. He pulled the chair from Ji-ho's desk and sat down across from her, which she had never seen him do. Take a secondary seat. Position himself at her level rather than above it. She understood this was deliberate. She didn't know yet whether to be grateful for it. 15 years ago, he said, a journalist came to Seoul investigating what he believed was an international trafficking network operating through Korean shipping infrastructure. He had sources. He had documents. Min Jae paused. He got close enough that someone noticed. Her breathing had gone shallow. She kept it even. His name appeared in internal communications that I found 3 years ago when I first began to understand the scope of what had been running inside Beihou without my knowledge, he continued. At that time, I did not connect the name to anyone currently connected to this company. I had no reason to. What did the internal communications say about him? Min Jae looked at her steadily. That he had been dealt with. The phrase landed like something physical. She had known. Some part of her had known from the moment she read the character stamped on the back of the manifest. Contained, dealt with. The language of problems solved, of loose ends addressed, of a man who had gotten too close to something being made to stop. She had known for 15 years that her father probably hadn't simply disappeared. Knowing a thing abstractly and hearing it spoken plainly in a locked office at 7 in the evening were different experiences. She pressed her palms harder against the desk. Who gave the order? She said. I don't have documentation that names a specific individual, Min Jae said, but the communications I found were routed through an internal channel that I have since traced to one person. She already knew the name. She felt it sitting at the base of her throat before he said it. Cho Hyun-seok. he said. But she didn't sleep that night. She lay in the apartment Baejo had arranged for her, a clean, small place in Mapo, 15th floor, with a window that looked toward the river, and stared at the ceiling and did not sleep. She went through everything she remembered from the manifests. She reconstructed the routing map in her head. She thought about Hyun-suk's smile when he passed her desk, the way he had said you start to see how everything connects, the practiced warmth of a man who had been trusted for 20 years and had spent 20 years making sure that trust was never examined too closely. She thought about her father in this city, following a thread through shipping records and transit documentation, getting close enough to make someone nervous. She thought about her mother telling her he would be home in 3 weeks. At 4 in the morning, she got up and made tea and sat at the small table by the window and opened her journal and looked at the photograph. "I'm here," she said to it, which was a strange thing to say to a photograph. She said it anyway. At 6, she showered, changed, and went back to the office. What? Min-jae was already there. He had clearly not gone home either. The jacket was different, but the tension in his shoulders was the same. The load-bearing tension of someone who had been running calculations through the night and had not liked any of the answers. He looked up when she came in, looked at her face, looked at the way she was carrying herself. "You're going to keep working," he said. "Yes," she said. "You understand that knowing who your father was makes you a liability in a way you weren't yesterday." "I understand it makes me a target," she said. "I'm not the same thing as a liability." Something moved behind his eyes. "Sit down. We need to talk about what happens next." She sat. He came around his desk and stood by the window. She had noticed he did that when he was thinking through something difficult, positioned himself near the light and the view of the city below, as if the scale of it helped him calibrate. "Hyun-seok knows I've started looking," Min-jae said. "He's known for several weeks. He's been careful, restructuring the routing, moving documentation, covering traces. What he doesn't know is that you exist and what you found in a single afternoon." He paused. "That advantage will not last long." "How long do we have?" "Days. Possibly less if he has someone watching the archive room." "Then we move faster," she said. He turned from the window. "You want to continue." "He killed my father," she said. The words were flat and plain, stripped of everything except the fact. "I didn't come to Seoul looking for this. I didn't know any of this existed. But I'm here, and I know what I know, and you need someone who can read those archives faster than anyone Hyun-seok can put in front of them." She held his gaze. "So yes, we move faster." Min-jae studied her for a long moment, with the focused, unreadable attention of someone making a decision that could not be unmade. "There's something else you should know," he said. His voice had changed. Something underneath the control had shifted, the way ice shifts before it cracks. You couldn't see it yet, but you could feel the change in what was supporting it. "My brother," he said, "Kang Min-ho. He died 6 years ago. The official account was a car accident during an attempted assassination of a rival syndicate figure, Sat. Wrong place, wrong timing, terrible luck." He stopped. "I believed that for 5 years, until I started finding what was running inside Baeko." She waited. "Hyun-seok organized the route that night," Min-jae said. "Min-ho was not a coincidence. He was in that car because Hyun-seok put him there." The room was very quiet. "He killed your brother," she said, "to move me into the primary position without opposition. Min-ho would have challenged the direction I eventually took Baeko. He was more cautious, more principled. He would have dismantled the criminal operations inside the syndicate before they grew to what they became." His jaw moved. Hyun-seok couldn't allow that. She was looking at him the way you looked at someone when you finally understood the weight they had been carrying and realized it was much heavier than it had appeared. "You've been running this investigation alone," she said, "for 3 years. And you haven't moved against him because you don't have enough. Because if I move without enough, he disappears and takes everything with him. Every document, every route, every contact." His voice was controlled, and she could hear what the control was costing him. "And I have spent 3 years finding pieces while he sits 20 feet down the hall and shakes my hand." At 9:15 that morning, Hyun-suk arrived on the 38th floor. Nia heard the elevator. She was at her desk with the banker's box and 3 additional boxes that Min-jae had authorized her to retrieve, her notebook open, her system running. She had constructed a cross-reference index on 4 sheets of paper laid across the surface of a second desk she'd pulled beside her own, each sheet color-coded with small marks in the margins that would look like random notation to anyone who didn't know what she was tracking. She heard Hyun-seok's footsteps. She did not look up. He stopped at her desk. "Still settling in?" he asked. "Pleasant, easy." "Getting there," she said, not looking up from the manifest she was reading. "These archive records are a project." "Historical files," he said. "They've needed organization for years." A pause, light and conversational. "What are you looking for specifically?" "Q4 transit reconciliation," she said. "Director Kang wants the historical baseline for the Incheon corridor." He was looking at her desk. She could feel his eyes moving across the pages she had spread out. She had been careful about what was visible. She had arranged the pages so that what showed was genuine reconciliation work. Real, tedious, exactly what she had described. Everything she had actually found was inside the notebook, which was closed, under her left elbow. "Let me know if you need context on any of those files," he said. "I've been with Bayako since those years. I know the records." "I will," she said. "Thank you." He moved on. She did not exhale until she heard Min-jae's door open and close. She looked down at her notebook and wrote in the smallest handwriting she could manage. He looked at the desk. He was counting pages. The problem announced itself at 11:40. Ji-ho came to her desk with a folder and a look she had learned to read in the past week. The look of someone delivering information they would prefer not to be delivering. "There's been a request," he said quietly, setting the folder down. "From Director Cho. He's asked HR to prepare a revised access log for the archive room. Effective from this morning, access requires secondary authorization from his office in addition to the standard executive approval." She looked at the folder. Then she looked at Ji-ho. "That's new," she said. "That's very new," he said. "It's never been required before." She understood immediately. Hyun-suk had not been satisfied by what he'd seen on her desk. He had been counting pages. He was now closing the archive. She looked at the boxes beside her desk. She had 3 of them. Once she returned them to the archive room, getting them back would require Hyun-suk's authorization. "How long before the new protocol takes effect?" she said. "It's already been sent to HR," Ji-ho said. "Processing today." She stood up, picked up the nearest banker's box, and walked it into Min-jae's office without knocking. He was with 2 department heads. All 3 of them looked up. "I need 60 seconds, she said to the room, and looked at Min-jae. The department heads excused themselves with the speed of people who had learned not to wait to be asked. She told Min-jae about the archive access change in 40 seconds. She watched his face. She watched the moment the calculation ran and the answer came back at him. "He's accelerating," Min-jae said. "Yes. And I still have 3 boxes on my desk. If you tell me to go through them right now, uninterrupted, I can finish before end of day. What do you need?" "No interruptions, no calls. Ji-ho runs interference on anything that comes to the floor." She paused. "And I need the digital records. If he's changing the physical archive access, there will be a mirror somewhere on the internal server. Something he can't move as easily as paper because it's been there too long and pulling it would create a flag." Min-jae picked up his phone, made 2 calls. The second one lasted 45 seconds and was in Korean too fast for her to follow every word, but she caught the name of his head of IT security. "You have until 5, he said when he ended the call. "After that, I can't guarantee the network access stays clean." She went back to her desk and opened the first box. She found the ledger at 2:17 in the afternoon. It was not a manifest. It was not a transit record. It was formatted as an internal budget allocation document, mundane, bureaucratic, the kind of file that lived in archives forever because nobody ever thought to look at it. But embedded inside the line item notations, using the same Joseon-era calligraphic compression she had identified in the seal modifications, was a running ledger of transactions that had nothing to do with Baeko's official accounts. dollar amounts, dates, a code system for destinations she was beginning to read, and names. Not many. 6 total, each appearing multiple times across a span of 7 years, 5 of them she didn't recognize. The 6th was Kang Min-ho. She sat with that for a moment. Kang Min-ho, Min Jae's brother, appearing in a ledger of illegal transactions multiple times, across multiple years, always as a recipient rather than an originator, always associated with a specific destination code she had been tracking as one of the Southeast Asian receiving addresses. It didn't fit the narrative. Min Jae had described his brother as the principled one, the cautious one, the man Hyun-suk had needed to remove because he would have shut the criminal operations down. But his name was in the ledger. She turned the page. The final entry for Kang Min-ho's code was dated 3 months before his death. The transaction was larger than any previous entry. Next to it, in the same compressed calligraphic notation, was a character she had to look at twice. It wasn't a transaction description, it was a word, witness. Her mind ran the new configuration very fast, the way it ran everything. Not sequentially, but all at once, the whole pattern shifting as the new piece found its position. Min-ho hadn't been part of the operation. The transactions listed under his name were not payments to him. They were payments made on his behalf, to sources, to contacts, to the same investigative infrastructure a journalist would build when he was trying to document something too dangerous to pursue openly. Min-ho had been investigating Hyun-suk from inside the family. He had been building evidence. He had been close. 3 months from his death, he had been close enough that the ledger had stopped recording transactions and started recording a threat assessment. Witness. Min-ho hadn't been collateral damage. He had been the primary target all along. She closed the ledger. She placed it on top of the other documents she had separated from the general pile over the course of the day. She pressed her hands flat on the desk and stared at the wall and let the full shape of it settle. Hyun-suk hadn't just killed Min Jae's brother to clear a path. He had killed him to silence a witness. The same thing he had done to her father, the same mechanism, the same man. 2 people who had found the truth and been made to disappear for it, years apart, while Hyun-suk continued sitting 20 feet down the hall and shaking hands and smiling. She was still staring at the wall when her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't have saved. 3 words in Korean. She translated them in 2 seconds. Stop what you're doing. She looked at the message. Her pulse had gone very quiet in the way it sometimes did under pressure. Not slow, just internal, like it had pulled itself deeper to stay out of the way. She looked at the ledger. She looked at the boxes still waiting to be reviewed. She picked up her phone and walked to Min Jae's office and knocked once and opened the door. He looked up. He saw her face. He stood. She held the phone out to him. He read the message. His expression did something she had not seen before. A movement through the controlled surface, fast and dark, like something passing underwater. When did this arrive? He said. 40 seconds ago. He set the phone on his desk and picked up his own and made a call. 3 words, Korean, voice completely flat. He ended the call. We need to move the documents, he said. I know. She looked at him. There's something else, the ledger. Min-ho's name is in it. She told him what she had found in 30 seconds, clean and factual, no softening. She watched him absorb it. She watched the moment it landed, the specific moment when he understood that his brother had died not because he was in the wrong place, but because he had been doing the right thing and had been killed for it. The muscle in his jaw moved. His hands were at his sides, and she watched them, and they were completely still, but the stillness was the kind that came from enormous effort rather than ease. He knew, Min Jae said. His voice was a sound she hadn't heard from him before. Not broken. Something before broken. He knew what Hyun-suk was, and he was trying to stop it, and he didn't tell me. He was probably trying to protect you, she said. He should have told me, Min Jae said, and the quiet fury in it was the kind that didn't have anywhere to go. She let it stand. She didn't try to answer it. Some things didn't have answers. They had only the space to exist. After a moment, he straightened. The control came back. She could see it happen, the deliberate reassembly piece by piece. Pack what you found, he said. Everything. We're moving it out of this building tonight. Where? Somewhere Hyun Suk can't authorize access to. She started moving. She was putting the ledger into her bag when Min Jae's office door opened from the outside without a knock. Not Jiho's careful tap, not the standard approach of anyone on the floor. Hyun Suk walked in. He looked at the documents on the desk. He looked at the ledger partially inside her bag. He looked at Min Jae. He was still smiling, but his eyes had changed. The practiced warmth was gone from them entirely, and what was underneath it was something she recognized from the documents she had been reading all day. The same cold efficiency that had been stamped on the back of a manifest 11 years ago in a single character, contained. Min Jae, he said, warm voice, empty eyes. We should talk. Nobody moved for 3 full seconds. That was how long it took the room to reconfigure itself around what had just walked through the door. 3 seconds of stillness that had the density of something much longer. The kind of stillness that happened when every person in a space simultaneously understood that whatever came next could not be undone. Nia's hand was still on the ledger. She did not remove it. Min Jae stood behind his desk with both hands at his sides and his face completely closed, the way a building went dark floor by floor when someone cut the power from below. She had seen him controlled before. This was different. This was the specific stillness of a man deciding, in real time, how much of what he knew to show. Hyun Seok closed the door behind him. He did it gently. That was the part that made the air in the room change quality. Not a slam, not a show of force, just a quiet click of a latch settling into place. The gentleness of a man who had never needed volume to make a point. You should sit, Min Jae said. His voice was even, offering nothing. I'd rather stand, Hyun Seok said. He looked at Nia. Miss Brooks, you've had a productive afternoon. She said nothing. She had learned from Min Jae that silence was a legitimate response, and sometimes the only one that didn't give ground. The archive access request, Min Jae said. That was you. Administrative efficiency, Hyun Seok said. Those records haven't had proper oversight in years. It seemed appropriate. His eyes moved to the ledger under Nia's hand. What have you found? Reconciliation work, Nia said. Q4 transit baseline. Hyun Seok looked at her for a moment without the smile. Just looked. It was the first time she had seen his face without it, and it was a different face entirely. Older, harder, organized around a different set of priorities than the ones he performed. Min Jae, he said, turning back. We've known each other for 20 years. I think we can dispense with the formalities. Then dispense with them, Min Jae said. Whatever she's told you she found, I found it, Min Jae said. She found it faster, but I've been finding it for 3 years. He came around his desk and stood in the open space between the desk and the door, not blocking the exit, but occupying the room differently, changing its geometry. The routing corridors, the ledger system, the calligraphic encoding in the manifest headers. I've had most of it. What I didn't have was the chain of authorization going back far enough to establish pattern. He paused. Now I have that. Hyun Seok was quiet. The smile came back, smaller than before, reconfigured. Not warmth anymore. Just the shape of warmth worn out of habit. You're going to hand me to the authorities, he said. That's exactly what I'm going to do. With what you have now. With what I have, plus what was found today, plus what my IT team is pulling from the server archive in the next 4 hours, yes. Min Jae's voice did not rise. It had gone to a register below the one he normally used, quieter and more absolute. I have your routing ledgers, Hyun Seok. I have 15 years of encoded transaction records. I have the authorization chains for 11 separate illegal shipment corridors. And I have documentation connecting you to the deaths of 2 people who found what you were doing and were killed for it. The room went very still again. Hyun Seok's eyes moved to Nia, not the practiced social glance of a man acknowledging a junior employee, something more direct and more cold. Her father, he said. And my brother, Min Jae said. The words landed in the room like something dropped from a height. She watched Hyun Seok's face when Min Jae said it, watched for the tell. The flinch, the defensive shift. the recalibration of a man caught. What she saw instead was something worse. A very small adjustment, almost imperceptible, like a man shifting weight from one foot to the other. Not guilt, not surprise. Just the practical reassessment of a position. "You can't prove that," Hyun-seok said. "The ledger connects your routing system to both deaths. The character notation establishes intent. I have a forensic analyst who has been working this documentation for 6 weeks and whose report will—" "A report," Hyun-seok said, and his voice had gone flat too, dropping the performance entirely. "You have a report and some archive documents, and a secretary who's been here 10 days, and you think that's enough to take to international authorities and end 20 years of operational infrastructure that you have benefited from." He stopped. His jaw tightened. "Don't be naive, Min-jae. You know what this organization has given your family." "I know what it cost my family," Min-jae said. "Your father built this. My father built a logistics company. What you built inside it is yours." Min-jae's voice was still quiet, still absolute. The quietness of it was the most frightening thing in the room. "I am ending it. Tonight. You can leave this building with a security escort, and we handle this through proper channels, or you can make this harder than it needs to be. Either way, it ends tonight." Hyun-seok looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket. Nia's entire body went cold. He produced a phone, pressed a key, held it up briefly. "I have 7 members of your senior team in secured locations," he said. "People who have been loyal to you personally, not to the family name. If I don't make a specific call within the next 40 minutes, their situations become complicated." He pocketed the phone. "I'm not asking you to stop the investigation. I understand that ship has sailed. I'm asking you to give me 72 hours to make arrangements." Min-jae did not move. 72 hours, Hyun-seok said, "and everyone goes home safe. Then you pursue whatever legal process you have access to, and I cooperate fully. You have my word. The word of a man who had killed 2 people and hidden it for 15 years. Nia looked at Min-jae. She watched his face. She watched him run the calculation. 7 people, 72 hours, the specific weight of loyalty that had accumulated across years of working beside people who trusted him. "Names," Min-jae said. Hyun-seok gave them. 7 names, rapid and precise. She memorized them automatically, watching Min-jae's face as each one landed and registered. The last name made Min-jae's eyes close for 1 second. 1 second, then open again, back to the controlled surface. Jiho, she realized. Jiho was one of the 7. "Get out of this office," Min-jae said. His voice had changed again. Something had burned away from it, some final layer of the professional register he maintained. What was underneath was older and harder. "Get out and wait for my call." Hyun-seok left. The door clicked shut behind him, the same way it had closed when he entered, quietly, without drama, with the patience of a man who believed he had just bought himself time. Min-jae moved the moment the door closed. He was on his phone in 4 steps, speaking Korean in rapid, low bursts, moving to the window and then back, covering the room in the tight contained circuit of someone thinking and acting simultaneously. She caught pieces of it. Location confirmation requests, a name she recognized as his head of security, coordinates for somewhere outside the city. She picked up the ledger, put it in her bag, and moved to her desk. She pulled the remaining 2 boxes and began photographing every document inside them with her phone. Not reading, just capturing, systematic and fast, working through each folder in order while he was on the call. He came out of his office 7 minutes later. "Busan," he said. She looked up from the second box. "The shipping terminal. Hyun-seok's primary operational base has always been outside Seoul. We've known the general location for months. He'll move there tonight with whatever he can take. He's not waiting 72 hours. The offer was to buy himself time to relocate." Min-jae was putting his jacket on, checking something inside the left breast. She realized it was not a phone. She looked away. "I have a team moving toward the terminal now. We need to get ahead of him before he can disappear the physical records. The people he's holding," she said. 2 teams, 1 for the terminal, 1 for the locations he gave." He stopped, looked at her directly. "You are going to a safe house on the north side of the city with 2 of my people. You stay there until I call." She set down the folder she was holding. No. Miss Brooks, Nia, she said. You called me Nia once. Call me that when you're about to make a decision about my life. She held his eyes. I photographed everything in these boxes. The digital copies are uploaded to a server your IT head set up for me this afternoon. They can't be erased from inside Baeko's system. You have what you need for the legal case regardless of what happens at the terminal tonight. She paused. But if Hyun Seok's operational records at the terminal use the same encoding system as the manifests, someone needs to read them on site and identify what's critical before he burns them or moves them. I have people who can, not in 4 hours, she said. Not fast enough. You know that. She picked up her bag. I'm not a soldier. I know that. I'm not going to pretend I can fight. But I'm the only person who can read those records in real time and tell your team exactly what they're looking at and what matters. Min-jae looked at her. She looked back. If something happens to you, he started. Then I came to Seoul for a job and something happened to me, she said. I'm not willing to find out what happened to my father and then sit in a safe house while someone else finishes it. Her voice was steady. The thing behind her sternum was not steady. She kept the two separate. I made that choice. You made yours 3 years ago when you decided to take this on alone. I'm telling you I'm in it. Let me be in it. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Stay behind the perimeter line, Seung, he said. You do not go inside the terminal structure until the area is secure. Agreed. You follow instructions from my security team without argument. Agreed. And you get in the car I tell you to get in, and you don't leave it until I personally tell you it's clear. Agreed, she said. Then, can I ask one thing? He was already moving to the door. Jiho, she said. Is he going to be okay? Min-jae paused with his hand on the door. I have a team moving to his location right now, he said. He'll be okay. She nodded. She picked up her bag, the ledger inside it, her notebook, her phone with its contents already uploaded, the weight of everything she'd found distributed across digital and physical backup the way Min-jae had taught her without meaning to, by doing things twice. She thought about her father for 1 second, just one, then she followed Min-jae through the door. The drive to Busan took 3 hours and 40 minutes. She was in the second car, a dark SUV with 2 of Min-jae's security team, a man called Sergeant Oh, who hadn't told her his first name, and a younger man named Ryu, who had. The roads went from city to corridor to coast, the light changing as they moved south, the urban density falling away, and the landscape opening into something harder and more industrial as they approached the port city. She used the drive to work. She had the photos from the archived documents on her phone, and she went through them systematically, building a reference index for the notation system that would let her read new documents at the terminal quickly if they used the same encoding. She filled 8 pages of her notebook. Ryu watched her work from the front seat with the expression of someone watching a person do something that made sense but that he couldn't follow. You read all of that today? He said. Most of it, she said, and you remember it. Enough of it. He turned back to the road. After a moment, he said quietly, Director Kang has been working this case for 3 years. He found things, but he couldn't read them fully. The encoding. He paused. Where did you learn calligraphy like that? Graduate research, she said. Historical trade documentation. I spent a year on Joseon-era administrative records. She looked at her notebook. I didn't know at the time that it was going to matter. Ryu was quiet. Things are like that sometimes, she said. Bam. The terminal came into view at 11:43. It was vast in the way industrial infrastructure was vast. Not beautiful, not dramatic, just enormous and indifferent, sitting against the coastline with the blunt permanence of something that had been built to outlast the people who used it. Cargo containers stacked 10 high in multiple rows. Steel catwalks running between loading structures. A main building running the length of the primary dock. The ocean behind it was moving, dark, lit here and there by the lights of container ships sitting at anchor in the outer harbor. The wind off the water was cold and sharp. She could smell salt and diesel, and something metallic underneath both. Sergeant O put his hand out before she opened the car door. Perimeter, he said. You don't move until I say." "I know," she said. They had parked 300 meters from the terminal's eastern fence line, with 4 other vehicles from Min Jae's team positioned around the perimeter. She could see the terminal's main access road from where they sat, a straight shot to the loading area, lit at intervals by security lighting. Min Jae was in the lead vehicle. She could see the silhouette of him through the rear window on his phone, coordinating. Then the first shot went off from somewhere inside the terminal. Not at them. Inside, a flat percussive crack that bounced off the steel containers and the water and came back distorted. Then 2 more in rapid succession. Sergeant Oh swore in Korean and was out of the car before the echo died. "Stay," he said to her, the words short and absolute. She stayed. Through the window, she watched Min Jae's lead vehicle empty fast. 4 doors, 4 people, organized and directional. She watched them move toward the terminal's fence line with the low economical movement of people who had trained for exactly this. She watched Min Jae among them, moving the same way. Not the CEO, not the corporate executive, something underneath that role that had clearly been there a long time. More shots from inside. Different positions. She could hear the directional variance. Hyun-seok had people in there. Ryu was on a radio in the front seat, low and continuous. She watched the terminal. She watched the catwalks above the loading area. She was watching the geometry of the structure, the way she watched everything, building the map of it in her head. Where the entry points were, where the sight lines ran, where you would position people if you controlled the interior and were expecting a perimeter approach. And then she saw the steam pipeline. It ran along the exterior wall of the main building at approximately the 2nd-story height. An aging industrial infrastructure line, heavy gauge, the kind that had been installed in the original construction and updated patchwork over decades. It ran from a heating unit on the north end of the building, across the face of the primary loading structure, and terminated at a pressure release valve above what appeared to be the main office cluster, above Hyun-seok's most likely position if he was managing from inside. She looked at the pipeline. She looked at her bag. She looked at the 4 cans of sparkling energy drink she had put in there that morning because she had been awake since 4 and had needed something to get through the day and had bought the multi-packs from the convenience store in her building's lobby and shoved all 4 into her bag without much thought. She looked at the cargo tape on the floor of the SUV. A roll of it, industrial orange, sitting in the door pocket where someone had left it. She thought about what a corrupted pressure valve on an aging steam pipeline would do if the line experienced sudden additional pressure load at a seal point. She was not an engineer. She had not studied industrial infrastructure. She had, however, spent the past 2 weeks reading Baco International's maintenance records as part of her archive work, and she had read enough deferred maintenance logs to understand what happened to old pipes under conditions they hadn't been built for. She picked up the tape. Ryu was still on the radio. She opened the car door quietly. "Hey," Ryu started. "Perimeter," she said. "I'm not going inside," which was technically true for approximately the next 4 minutes. The eastern fence line had a gap where a section of chain link had been pulled loose and not repaired, the kind of deferred maintenance that existed everywhere in aging port infrastructure. She went through it sideways, moving fast and low along the exterior wall of the main building, staying below the security lighting's angle. She could hear the fight clearly now. Controlled bursts of gunfire from at least 3 interior positions, Min Jae's team responding from the perimeter access points. The sound bounced off steel and concrete and water in all directions until it was difficult to locate anything precisely. She kept moving. The pipeline access point was a ladder, a fixed iron ladder bolted to the exterior wall, leading up to a maintenance catwalk at the base of the pipeline. She put her bag over her shoulder, gripped the lowest rung, and climbed. Her hands were shaking, not badly, not enough to stop her, but she was aware of them. The fine tremor in her fingers as she pulled herself up rung by rung, the cold metal of the ladder against her palms, the sound of her own breathing loud in her ears because everything else, the fear, the rational assessment of how badly this could go. She had pressed down hard below the surface and was keeping there through sheer stubbornness. She reached the catwalk. The pipeline was at shoulder height from where she stood. A massive steel line, sweating condensation, warm to the touch even through her sleeve when she made contact. She moved along the catwalk toward the pressure seal above the office cluster. She could see through the catwalk grating to the interior of the building below. The main floor was a chaos of stacked containers and equipment racks. Lights were on in the office block. Through the windows, she could see movement, figures, the blue flicker of monitor screens. Hyun-seok was in there. She stopped at the pressure seal. It was a flange joint in the pipeline, 4 bolts, with a safety release valve on the top side. The valve had a worn appearance. She could see corrosion around the base fitting, the kind that happened when maintenance had been deferred for years. She took out the 4 energy drink cans. She shook all 4 of them as hard as she could, 20 seconds each, the carbonation building inside until she could feel the cans hard and tight in her hands. She pulled the tape from her bag, tore lengths of it, and began wrapping the cans together in a tight cluster. Not because the cluster would do anything more dramatic than individual cans, but because the combined burst pressure aimed at a single point would be more focused. Her hands were still shaking. She kept going. She positioned the cluster against the corroded base of the pressure valve. She ran a length of tape from the cluster to the valve handle, not to activate it, but to ensure that when the cans ruptured, the pressure came against the valve fitting rather than dissipating sideways. She looked at the catwalk below her and the interior through the grating in the office block windows, and she thought, clearly and briefly, "This is either going to work or it isn't, and either way I've run out of smarter options." She hit the cans with the heel of her palm. Once, twice, 3 times, hard as she could, targeting the weak point where the carbonation had built highest. The first can gave on the 3rd hit. The burst was not loud. It was pressurized and directional, and it hit the valve fitting at the exact angle she had taped it for. And the corroded seal on the aging fitting did exactly what aging corroded seals did when they received sudden pressure they had not been rated for. It failed. The steam came out not as a jet, but as an explosion of vapor, massive, immediate, filling the space above the office cluster in a whiteout cloud that drove immediately downward through every opening and vent in the building's roof structure. The sound was a sustained roar that drowned the gunfire for the next 12 seconds. She grabbed the catwalk railing with both hands as the pressure wave hit the structure. Below her, through the white chaos of steam, she heard men shouting. Not organized shouting, not tactical, but the raw, disoriented shouting of people who had just been blinded and scalded simultaneously and had no idea what had happened to their perimeter. She heard, from somewhere in the main building, a door breach. Min-jae's team. She was climbing back down the ladder when her foot slipped on a steam-wet rung and she dropped the last 6 feet, landed hard on her left side on the concrete below, and lay there for a moment with the impact moving through her in waves, her shoulder taking the main force, and her elbow something she was going to feel for a long time. She rolled to her knees, got up. Her left arm wasn't working right. Not broken, she thought, but not fine. She picked up her bag with her right hand and moved back toward the fence gap. She was halfway there when someone grabbed her from behind. Not Min-jae's people. The grip was wrong, rough, one-handed, the other person managing something else simultaneously. She was turned around and found herself looking at a man she didn't know, broad-shouldered, with steam-reddened skin and eyes that were still watering from the vapor exposure. He said something in Korean. She didn't catch it. Her brain was running too fast. He said it again, and this time she caught the shape of it. "Where is it?" Or something close to that. And she understood that she was not being grabbed randomly. She was being grabbed specifically. Hyun-seok had known she had the ledger. She swung her bag. It connected with the side of his head with considerably more force than she expected. The weight of the ledger and her notebook and her laptop charger and the remaining tape and everything else she'd accumulated, giving it an impact she hadn't planned for. He staggered. She didn't wait to see what happened next. She ran. She was through the fence gap and halfway to the perimeter vehicles when she heard Min-jae's voice, not on a phone, in person, close, calling her name in a way she had never heard him call anything. She stopped. He reached her in 4 strides. He took her by both arms, and she made a sound when he caught the left one, and he immediately shifted his grip. "Your arm." "It's fine," she said. "The steam?" "I know," he said. He was looking at her face and then at her arm, and then at her face again with an expression she had not seen on him and did not entirely know what to do with. "I saw you on the catwalk. I saw what you did." Did it work? She said. Your team got in? They're inside now. He hadn't let go of her right arm. Hyun-seok. He knew about the ledger, she said. He sent someone for me. He was trying to get the documents. Min Jae's jaw set. He turned and said something over his shoulder to Sergeant Oh, 2 words, and Oh was moving immediately back toward the terminal. We need to get you out of the perimeter, Min Jae said. Is he still inside? She said. Yes. Then I'm not Naya. His voice stopped her. The same quality it had had in his office when he had first said her name. A door opening. But different now. Rougher. Something personal underneath the operational register. You have done enough. I need you out of the perimeter so I can go inside. She looked at him. He was still holding her arm. She was aware of it the way she was aware of her own heartbeat. Not as a thought, as a fact of the body. Go, she said. He looked at her for 1 second longer. Then he turned and went back through the fence and into the steam-white darkness of the terminal where Cho Hyun-seok was still waiting, and 20 years of betrayal were finally running out of places to hide. She stood at the fence line and listened to the terminal. The steam had thinned to a slow drift, rising in pale columns from the roof vents and dispersing against the night sky above the harbor. The gunfire had stopped. That had happened gradually, not all at once. A few isolated cracks after the main burst of activity, then silence settling in layers the way silence did after violence, the quiet arriving in pieces rather than completely, the way your ears kept expecting the next sound even after the last one had died. Her left arm was bad, not broken. She had broken her wrist at 11 falling off a bicycle, and she remembered what that felt like, remembered the specific quality of that pain, and this was different. Something in the shoulder joint, a separation maybe. The kind of injury that was going to make itself known more thoroughly once the adrenaline stopped holding it at a distance. She had her right hand pressed against it, and she was breathing through the pulse of it, slow and deliberate, the same way she had learned to breathe through everything she couldn't fix immediately. Ryu was beside her. He had found her at the fence gap and had not left since. He was on the radio intermittently, relaying position updates in clipped Korean, his eyes moving between her and the terminal entrance with the focused vigilance of someone who had been given one specific job and intended to do it. Min Jae, she said. Status. Inside, Ryu said. Moving toward the main office block. She nodded. She looked at the terminal entrance. She kept looking at it the way you kept looking at a door when someone you needed had walked through it and hadn't come back yet. She thought about her father in this city 15 years ago, following a thread through exactly the kind of documentation she had spent the past 10 days reading. Sitting in some equivalent of an archive room, or a cafe with papers spread across the table, or a rented room with documents organized across a bedspread the way she used to do in graduate school when she was working something out, getting close enough to see the shape of the whole thing. She thought about what it cost to get that close. She pressed her hand harder against her shoulder and breathed. 12 minutes later, Min Jae walked out of the terminal. He was walking without assistance, which was the first thing she assessed. His jacket was gone. His shirt had a dark stain across the left side that could have been grease or could have been blood. From the distance, she couldn't determine which. His face was carrying something new, something that had not been there when he went in. Not the controlled surface she had learned to read, but something underneath that surface that the last hour had stripped the covering from. He walked directly to her. He stopped 2 feet away and looked at her arm. Hospital, he said. Hyun-seok, she said. In custody. His jaw moved. My men have him. International authorities have been contacted. The documentation package went to 3 separate law enforcement bodies 40 minutes ago. Your digital archive upload triggered the protocol automatically when it hit the secure server. He paused. It's done. She let that land. She let it move through her, what it meant, what it did not mean, the difference between a thing being over and a thing being healed. Those were different categories, and she was clear-eyed enough at the end of a day like this one to know it. Are you hurt? She said, looking at the stain on his shirt. Not significantly. He said it in the way of someone being accurate rather than reassuring. What does not significantly mean? It means I need stitches and not a surgeon. He looked at her arm again. You need imaging. I need a lot of things, she said, starting with sitting down. He moved to her left side and she accepted his arms, his right arm offered at the correct height, positioned so she didn't have to raise her shoulder to take it. And she understood that he had assessed her injury and adjusted without making it a moment, and she was too tired to feel anything about that except grateful. They walked to the vehicles. The hospital in Busan was 40 minutes from the terminal. They sat in the same room while a doctor worked through the assessments, her shoulder first, which was a partial separation and required reduction, and a sling, and produced a sound and a sensation she was going to spend considerable effort forgetting, and then Min-jae's side, which was a laceration from a piece of shrapnel that required 8 stitches and which he sat through without changing expression, though she watched his hand on the table beside him close into a fist and stay there for the duration. They did not talk much in the hospital. There wasn't a version of conversation that fit the quality of the room and the exhaustion and the specific strange intimacy of sitting beside someone while medical people worked on both of you in the aftermath of something you had survived together. At one point he said, "Your shoulder is going to hurt for several weeks." "I know," she said. "You shouldn't have gone up the catwalk." "I know that too." He looked at her. "It worked." "It mostly missed," she said. "The cans weren't aimed at anything in particular. I just needed the pressure." "It worked," he said again, and the way he said it the second time was different from the first. Less assessment, more something else. Something she didn't push on because the hour was late and her arm was in a sling, and some things were better left to find their own time. She was discharged at 3:40 in the morning with a sling, 3 prescriptions, and discharge instructions in Korean that she read in full in the elevator on the way down. They drove back to Seoul as the night turned toward dawn. She sat in the back of the SUV and watched the coastline give way to the inland darkness, and then gradually to the approach of the city, the first distant lights of it, the way it resolved from darkness into something specific and lit and enormous as you got close. The Han River appearing, and then the bridges over it, and then Seoul itself, awake in its 24-hour way, indifferent to the fact that the night had contained what it had contained. Min-jae was beside her. At some point during the drive, his shoulder had come in contact with hers, not her injured shoulder, the other one, and neither of them had moved away from it. She was aware of the contact, and she was aware that he was aware of it, and she let it be what it was, which was 2 people at the end of something very long sitting next to each other in the dark. She fell asleep somewhere outside of Suwon. She didn't mean to. She woke when the car stopped and found that her head had dropped against his shoulder and that he had not moved to prevent it. She sat up. He was awake, looking out the window at Baeko's parking structure. "Sorry," she said, automatic. "Don't," he said. Not unkindly. She looked at the building. The 38th floor lights were off for the first time since she had arrived. "What happens now?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone avoiding the question, but the silence of someone who had been living with the answer for a long time and was finding the right place to begin it. "The syndicate's criminal operations are finished," he said. "The network Hyun-seok built took years and specific relationships that no longer exist. The routing contacts, the Port Authority connections, the intermediate parties. When the international prosecution goes forward, the documentation you assembled will dismantle what remains." He paused. Baeko International continues. "The legitimate business is real and substantial. I intend to keep it that way." "And you," she said. "I dissolved the remaining organizational structures that don't have legal standing," he said. "I've been preparing for that for 2 years. The people who have been with the family who want legitimate employment, I keep. The ones who don't, I let go with terms." "And personally," she said. He turned to look at her. In the dim light of the parking structure, she could see the exhaustion in his face. Not weakness, just the honest weight of a man who had been carrying something for a very long time and had set it down and not yet adjusted to the absence of the load. "I don't know yet," he said. "I've been running toward this for 3 years. I'm not certain what I look like when I stop running." She understood that more than she expected to. "You look like someone who needs to sleep," she said. Something moved in his face. Not quite a smile. The ghost of one occupying the same territory. "So do you," he said. "I have one thing to do first," she said. She did it in her office at 4:15 in the morning, with her arm in a sling and the cleaning crew moving quietly somewhere on the floor below. She called her mother. Chicago was 13 hours behind. It was 3:15 in the afternoon there, which meant her mother was either at work or at her sister's house. And when the call connected on the fourth ring and her mother's voice came through, that particular voice, the one that had read her to sleep and argued with her and held her. When 4 years after her father disappeared, a judge had signed a declaration and a funeral had happened without a body. Nia sat in her chair in the quiet of the 38th floor and pressed her good hand against her mouth for a moment before she could speak. "Baby," her mother said, "it's the middle of the night there." "I know," Nia said. "I know, Mom. I needed to hear your voice." A pause. "What happened?" "Something I'm going to tell you about properly when I can," Nia said. "Not right now. I'm okay. I promise I'm okay." She stopped. "I found something about Dad." The silence on the line was the particular silence of someone who had made peace with a grief and was now feeling it shift under them. "Tell me," her mother said. "He found it," Nia said. "Whatever he was looking for when he came here, he found it. He got close enough that they couldn't let him keep going." She was keeping her voice steady through sheer will, and she didn't entirely succeed. "He wasn't careless, Mom. He wasn't reckless. He did exactly what he went there to do. The people he found were willing to do things that he wasn't." Her mother was quiet for a long time. "Did you find them?" she said finally, not asking whether Nia had found evidence or documentation, asking the real thing. "Yes," Nia said. "They're in custody. The whole thing is going to international prosecution. Everything he documented 15 years ago. It's part of the case now. His name is going to be part of how this gets resolved." Another silence. Longer. "Are you safe?" her mother said. "Yes." "Are you really safe, or are you telling me you're safe?" "Both," Nia said. "Mom, both." She heard her mother exhale. A long, slow exhale, the kind that carries things out of the body that have been held there for years. "Come home soon," her mother said. "Not yet," Nia said, "but soon." They stayed on the line for a while after that without saying much. Just the connection, the distance, the sound of each other breathing across 13 time zones, and 15 years of carrying something that had finally, in the space of 10 days, been given a shape and a name and a place in the legal record where it could be addressed. When she hung up, she sat alone in the office for a while. Then she opened her notebook to a fresh page and wrote her father's name at the top of it. Not for investigation, not for cross-referencing, just because she could write it without the specific weight it had carried for 15 years. And she wanted to know what that felt like. It felt like something that had been clenched for a long time, slowly, carefully, opening. The weeks that followed were not clean. Clean was not how real things resolved. Real things resolved the way floods receded, slowly, leaving debris, requiring assessment and repair, and the unglamorous work of going through what remained to determine what was salvageable and what had to be removed. The international prosecution of Cho Hyun-seok and 19 associated parties took shape over 6 weeks, with law enforcement agencies from 4 countries working from the documentation package Nia had assembled and uploaded from Baeko's archive. She was contacted formally for testimony 3 times. She gave it in careful, precise detail, presenting the document analysis methodology as clearly as she would have presented a research paper, because the legal case required the same quality of rigor that finding the evidence had required, and she was not interested in doing the first part right and the second part sloppily. She sat across a conference table from an international investigative prosecutor named Shin on a gray November morning and walked him through the calligraphic encoding system for 2 hours. Shin was methodical and skeptical in the productive way of someone whose job required him to disbelieve everything until it was proven. And by the end of the 2 hours, he had stopped being skeptical and started asking follow-up questions that meant he was building something from what she had given him. "How long to read a new document using this system?" he asked. "Depends on the compression level," she said. "Standard format, 2 to 3 minutes. High compression, up to 10. "And you develop this reading capacity in 10 days, she said. He looked at her. "That's not normal." "No," she said. It's not. Well, Ji-ho was released unharmed on the same night as the terminal operation. He had been held at a location outside the city, not roughly, Hyun-seok apparently having calculated that harming a staff member directly would complicate his leverage position. And when Ryu's team reached him, he had been sitting in a locked storage room with his phone removed, reading a 2-year-old magazine he had found on a shelf. He came back to work 4 days later. He sat at his desk and worked with the same precise economy as always. And on the 5th day, he knocked on Nia's office door. She had moved to a larger space, a formal reassignment that Min-jae had made without ceremony, and stood in the doorway with his hands clasped in front of him. "I want to apologize," he said. She looked up. "For what?" "For not telling you more when you arrived, about what you were walking into." He looked at the middle distance, choosing words with the carefulness of someone who did not often speak personally about anything. "I knew the position was dangerous. I knew more than I told new staff. I thought the information was mine to protect." He paused. "You were never given the choice to decide for yourself." She looked at him for a moment. "Ji-ho," she said, "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it." She set down her pen. "You were 19 years old when Hyun-seok built his network inside this company. You had been here, what, 3 years? 4? Working for a family that trusted you and a system you believed in. You protected what you knew how to protect." She paused. "That's not a failure. That's just a person doing their best inside a situation that was much larger than any one person." He was quiet. "I've been doing that my whole career," she said. "My whole life. A little bit. You learn to see the full shape of things when you have enough distance from them. You don't usually have that distance at the time." Ji-ho nodded, once, careful and precise. "Thank you," he said. "Go back to work," she said, "and get me the Incheon Q4 files. I need them by noon." Something close to relief moved through his expression. The familiar, the operational, the return to what they both knew how to do. "By 11, he said, and went back to his desk. Min-jae dissolved the Baeko Syndicate's organizational structures on a Thursday, December. Not publicly. There was nothing public to dissolve, no registered entity to file paperwork on. It was a series of meetings, a series of conversations, a series of terms negotiated and agreements concluded with the 43 people who had operated within the syndicate's structure and now needed to find new footing. Some of them transitioned directly into Baeko International's legitimate security and logistics divisions. Some took severance and left. 2 pushed back in ways that required a different kind of conversation, which Min-jae handled without involving Nia and which she did not ask about in detail. He told her about the dissolution the evening it was completed. They were in his office. Her new habit, which had developed without either of them formally establishing it, of stopping by his office at the end of the day when there was something to discuss, and sometimes when there wasn't. He was at the window again. The city spread below, the Han River visible in the distance, with its reflected lights making long lines across the dark water. "It's done," he said. She was in the chair across from his desk, her sling gone 2 weeks now, the shoulder still unreliable in certain directions but functional. "How do you feel?" she said. He considered the question seriously. She appreciated that about him, that he did not dismiss that kind of question or deflect it, that he engaged with it as he engaged with everything, with the attention of someone who believed that accurate self-assessment was a form of discipline. "Like something I built part of a life around is gone," he said, "and like that's both a loss and the correct thing." "Both can be true," she said. "Yes." He looked at the city. "My brother would have done this sooner. He was trying to do it himself in his way before Hyun-seok stopped him. I spent 3 years angry at what was done to him without understanding what he was attempting." He paused. "I understand it now. I understand why he didn't tell me. He knew I was not ready to let go of what the organization was, what it had been in the family." "Are you ready now?" she said. "I was ready when I found what Hyun-seok built inside it," he said. "I just didn't know how to move until you handed me the piece I'd been missing." He turned from the window. "You handed me the piece, and then you climbed a rusted catwalk in an active operation and blew up a steam line with energy drinks." She looked at him. "That is an accurate summary." "It is," he said, and he smiled. Not the ghost of one. A real one, arriving in his face the way things arrived in him, controlled to the last moment and then there. She had made him smile before. She remembered each time, the way you remembered things that happened rarely and mattered more for their rarity. This one was different from the others. This one had context behind it, weight, the specific warmth of something that had been earned through a shared difficulty that had asked real things from both of them. She looked at the smile and looked at the man producing it and thought about Chicago and the job listings she had applied to in the dark and the salary figure that had made her call Deja at 11:30 at night. She thought about the elevator and the thermos and 14 ounces of coffee that had redirected the entire trajectory of her life in a single graceless moment. She thought about her father finding a thread and following it to this city. She had followed a different thread to the same city and found not just what he had been following, but a reason to stay. "I want to do something," she said. He waited. "The foundation idea," she said, "that you mentioned, something to formalize the transition, what Vallejo International becomes going forward." She had been thinking about it for 2 weeks since he had mentioned it in passing during one of the prosecution preparation meetings. "I want it to carry both their names, my father and your brother, the Brooks Kang Foundation." She paused. They were both trying to end the same thing, 15 years apart, without knowing each other existed. That should mean something, formally. He was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "Simple. Absolute." She nodded. She reached into the bag she always carried and found her notebook and wrote it down. Brooks Kang Foundation. Because she wrote everything down. Because the habit of capturing things in permanent form was how she made them real and kept them real. He watched her write it. "Investigative journalism," he said. "Education. Access for people who don't have it." He was looking at the notebook. "What your father was doing when he came here. What Min Ho was building toward before he ran out of time. What we finish for them," she said. He looked at her. She looked back. There was a quality to the room that had been building for weeks. She had been aware of it the way you were aware of weather changing, felt it in small things, and the way silence between them had shifted from the silence of professional distance to something that simply was what it was and did not need a label to exist. She was not a person who rushed into naming things. She had found that unnamed things were often realer than named ones, at least until you had enough of them understood to make the name accurate. She understood enough now. "I dropped my spoon," she said. He blinked. "The day I arrived. In the elevator. I was so nervous about the interview I'd done, so worried about whether I'd gotten the job. I had my coffee in one hand and my bag in the other, and I'd stuck a spoon in the front pocket because I always carry a spoon because I hate the little plastic ones." She stopped. "It fell out in the elevator on the way to my first morning. I heard it hit the floor and I thought, here we go, this is how this starts." He was looking at her with the full attention he brought to everything, and underneath the attention, something that she recognized now for what it was. "And then the elevator doors opened and you were there," she said. "And you spilled 14 ounces of coffee on my suit," he said. "In my defense," she said, "you stepped forward." "I did," he said. He had not moved from the window, but the distance between them felt different than it had when the conversation started. "I was expecting the car to be empty." "Life is like that," she said. "Apparently," he said. She stood. She picked up her bag. She was doing the thing she always did at the end of these evenings. Beginning the exit, collecting herself, restoring the professional container that she carried things in because the professional container was also real and also useful. And she was not the kind of person who abandoned functioning structures just because she had developed feelings inside them. "Nia," he said. She stopped. "The cafe," he said. "Where you went your first week. The one 2 blocks from the building." She remembered. She had gone there on Friday afternoon of her first week, needing to sit somewhere that wasn't the office, and had ordered tea and sat by the window and watched Seoul and felt small in the good way. The way that reminded you that most things were larger than your current problem. "I'd like to have coffee there, Sian," he said. "With you. Not a work meeting." She looked at him. "Not a work meeting," she said. "No. Just coffee." "Yes," he said, "just coffee." She thought about it for approximately the amount of time it took to confirm that she had already decided. Saturday, she said. 9. 9, he said. She walked to the door. She opened it and paused with her hand on the frame, not for drama, just because she had learned that she tended to pause when things felt complete, as though her body needed a moment to register the weight of the right thing. Min Jae, she said without turning. Yes. Your brother would have liked the foundation name. She heard him take a breath. She heard the specific quality of that breath, what it was carrying. Yes, he said. He would have. She walked out. They went to the cafe on Saturday. It was small and warm and smelled of roasted barley and ground coffee, and the particular combination of smells that small places accumulated over years of the same people, coming to the same chairs with their different griefs and their ordinary days, and their occasional moments of something better than ordinary. She got there first. She always got places first. She sat at the window table and watched the street outside. The Saturday morning pedestrians, the joggers along the river path 2 blocks over visible in glimpses between buildings. The woman with the enormous yellow hat who walked past every morning at this hour, according to Naya's entirely unscientific personal survey of the neighborhood. She dropped her spoon. It hit the floor with the same small clink that things falling had. She reached down and picked it up and set it back on the table and laughed, quietly, to herself. The way you laughed at something that was not funny exactly, but was true. And truth had its own particular kind of humor once you had enough distance from the fear that used to live next to it. Min Jae arrived at 9:01. He was in something other than a suit for the first time since she had known him, dark trousers, a gray sweater, looking like a person rather than a role, and somehow this was the version of him that made him more rather than less imposing, the way certain things were more themselves without their packaging. He sat across from her. He looked at her face. He looked at the spoon. Already, he said. Honestly, it happens less than you'd think, she said. Given the reputation. The coffee arrived. It was very good. They sat in the window of the small cafe 2 blocks from Baeko International's headquarters, in the city that had taken something from both of them and given something back. And they drank it. And outside Seoul moved through its ordinary Saturday morning around them, enormous and indifferent and alive. She wrapped both hands around her cup. The shoulder still ached in cold weather. She expected it would for some time. Tell me something I don't know about you, she said. He considered it with his characteristic seriousness. I can't cook anything except doenjang jjigae, he said, and only because my mother made me learn one thing so I wouldn't starve. She stared at him. That's the most human fact you've ever told me. It's a deeply embarrassing fact, he said, with the dignity of a man presenting embarrassing information as though it were strategic data. It's a wonderful fact, she said. Tell me another one. He looked at her. The morning light was coming through the window and landing on the table between them and on his hands around his coffee cup and on the very small, very real thing that was happening in his face. The thing she had watched arrive slowly over 10 days of disaster and crisis, and 2 people finding out what the other was actually made of. I've been trying to think of a reason to come to this cafe since the 2nd week you were here, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, a group of children went past the window in a bright cluster, trailing a harassed-looking adult. You could have just asked, she said. I know, he said. I'm better at other kinds of decisions. I noticed, she said. She picked up her coffee. He picked up his. They were quiet together in the particular comfortable way of people who had run out of the need to perform anything for each other and had arrived at the simpler thing underneath. Just 2 people in a small cafe on a Saturday morning, with their histories and their dead and their repaired injuries and their complicated roads to this window and this table and this ordinary cup of coffee. She still dropped things. She still talked too much and moved too fast and saw patterns in documents that took everyone else 3 times as long to find and apologized reflexively for accidents before she had even fully registered them. He still had a face that could silence a room and a quality of stillness that most people read as coldness and a way of running every decision through a calculation that sometimes left warmth behind in the process. Neither of them was going to become someone else. That was not how it worked. That was not, she had come to understand, how it needed to work. You did not need a person who had become the right shape for you. You needed a person who looked at your shape and stayed anyway. He had watched her climb a catwalk in an active operation and blow up a steam line with convenience store drinks, and then walked 4 strides to reach her on the other side of a fence in the dark and held her arm. She had watched him hold 20 years of accumulated grief absolutely still, while the man who had caused it stood in his office and smiled, and then go into a terminal after him anyway and come back out. They had seen each other's shapes clearly. Outside the cafe window, the Han River was visible in a gap between buildings, a silver moving line, wide and permanent, running through the center of everything. She had looked at it her first week and felt small in the good way. She still felt that. She thought she would keep feeling it. She set her coffee down. She was about to say something when the door of the cafe opened and 2 small children ran in ahead of their grandmother, loudly, with the total physical commitment of children pursuing the smell of something sweet, and Nia leaned sideways to avoid being hit by the smaller one, and her elbow caught the edge of her cup and the cup slid, and Min Jae's hand came across the table and caught it. Just caught it, clean, quick, without looking. He set it back. She stared at him. 20 years of managing crises, he said. She laughed. It came out of her completely, real and unguarded, the kind of laugh that arrived without permission and didn't apologize for itself. It filled the small cafe, and the grandmother looked over and smiled at nothing in particular, and the children were already at the pastry case with their faces against the glass. Min Jae was watching her laugh. His face had the thing in it that she had been watching arrive for weeks. She stopped laughing. She looked at him. "Thank you," she said. "For the cup. For more than the cup." "Yes," he said. "For the thank you. For more than the thank you." Outside, Seoul went about its Saturday. Inside the small cafe, 2 blocks from a building that was becoming something different from what it had been, a woman who had come to a foreign city carrying an old grief and a photographic memory and a thermos. She couldn't manage in an elevator sat across from a man who had spent 3 years carrying the weight of his family's history and had finally set it down, and they finished their coffee, and it was enough, and it was real, and it was theirs.